Welcome to Get Motivated with Dr. Donato, a show designed to reach you where you are, focusing on the fact that you can be anything you want or desire. All you have to do is get motivated. If you need a challenge in your life, then look no further. Get Motivated with Dr. Donato starts now.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, to Get Motivated with Donato. I'm your host, Dr. Donato here, and I've got a special guest with me today, Michael Ashford. You may have seen him or heard him on his podcast, Rethinking Communications, and it's awesome to have you here, Michael. Thanks.
Donato, man, thank you so much for having me. I'm always honored to be a guest on anybody else's show. I know the hard work that goes into it, so I appreciate you.
Absolutely, man. So we're going to talk about your chapter here in Triumphant. It was so awesome. And I think, like, outside of obviously your podcast that everybody else should also watch, you bring some good perspectives and ways for us to think in your chapter. And I kind of want to go through that. But before we do, I always like to ask an icebreaker question. Sure. And that is, if you could meet anybody past or present, who would it be and why?
Being a man of faith, I'm apt to say Jesus Christ. But if you have a relationship with Jesus, don't you kind of already know him? Now, that's not in person, but I'm going to say outside of that, I would say Abraham Lincoln. I have read I've read the biography on Lincoln called Team of Rivals. Okay. And the way that he approached conflict and disagreement in a way that invited it in, even when it was uncomfortable and difficult and people really disagreed. I mean, the fact that he made up his cabinet of the people who ran against him and lost, it speaks to the brilliance of the man, the integrity of the man, and what he led this country through. I think it would be just, as a former journalist, I want to sit down and interview him and get to know just how his mind worked.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, that speaks a lot to him. I've heard of other people doing that kind of thing also, and it brings a little bit of a balance, doesn't it?
Yes, it
does. You get other people, hopefully they're not like arguing, right? But it's okay to disagree. It's okay to have a different opinion. We should be able to do it civilized. I don't know. I mean, growing up when I did in the 70s, I remember, my dad was kind of a big, bold kind of a guy, right? And he didn't talk a lot unless you talked to him, kind of a deal, or he had something to say. But when he said it, he meant it, but he was okay to disagree with people.
Yeah.
And most everybody was okay to disagree with him too. Because, he was a massive dude. But the thing is, back then especially, I think we could get along better with each other and be amicable, right? Where it's okay to disagree. It's okay to have your own unique point of view on a particular topic or whatever it was. And people still got along, and our country hasn't been that way lately. And it's kind of a disappointment. So hopefully everybody that's listening to this show can appreciate what you've just said and grab something from it. I'm kind of inspired to read that book now myself.
It's a huge book, but it is well worth the read, man. Absolutely.
All right. Well, so the next kind of an icebreaker question or kind of getting into the show now is, what does get motivated mean to you from your unique perspective?
I approach this, I guess I would say, what it immediately reminds me of, Donato, is I have done many things in my life and career, and included in those is I used to be a personal trainer. And when we think about our physical fitness and our health and getting to the gym or working out and exercising, a lot of people say or ask of a personal trainer, how do I get motivated? I need you to be my motivation and my accountability. And I always told folks, my clients, I can't give that to you. That motivation cannot be driven externally. There can be coaching, guidance, support on a chosen plan or path, but that motivation has to come from within you. There has to be something within you that can overcome the status quo of your current situation, of who you are, of comfortability, perhaps. And hopefully you see where I'm going with this. This is not just about our physical fitness and our health and exercise too. This
Right.
extends to a lot of other places in our lives. And so when I think about it, and in my first book that I wrote, which is called The Involved Man, I laid it out like this: your life, the life of a healthy, balanced person, an individual, I think is in best harmony when you prioritize your life in 4 categories and in this order. Your life is driven by a purpose. You prioritize the people and the relationships in your life that mean the most to you. Then your passions, the things that get you fired up, that you're excited about, and finally your profession. In that order. If ever in your life those things become out of balance, if your profession jumps above in prioritization the
Yep.
people in your life, you will feel out of balance. But at the top of that, to bring it back to your question about motivation, you've got to be in touch with and understand your purpose. Why are you here? What is the legacy that you want to live? How do you want to be remembered? All that stuff. What is the driving force of your life that says, this is, at the end of the day, my North Star? If you can understand that, and that can only be driven by you and your internal thoughts and motivations, that's where your motivation comes from. For me to answer your question, Donato, that's what it means to get motivated. Find that
Nice.
purpose.
No, hey man, I agree. That's the thing. Like, we do have to have it within ourselves, right? We're the ones that have to get up off the couch and do something.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't work any other way. I mean, yes, there can be some external, things to get the coaching, and I encourage everybody to do that. Get some coaches or mentors, and from all different walks of life, right? So we can learn as much as we can, so we can gain different perspectives on life. I mean, that's critical. I think that's really important, because if we surround ourselves with the right type of people, right, the higher thinking people, and the people that are just always generally motivated and things, that'll help inspire us as well, and makes it a little easier to get up off the couch, right?
And that's what you just said is a pretty critical point, I think. You can be inspired externally. You can look at other people and say, I like that path. I'm going to use that as an example. Or, you know what, that person and what they've accomplished, I can use that as a guide for my own life and what I want to. You can get inspiration externally. That's totally, I think, on the docket. What has to happen is that motivation when things get tough, when things don't go well. What is that thing that continues to kind of be that little voice in your head that says, remember what you want, remember what you're trying to accomplish here. It's more than just this fleeting moment. Keep going. That's
Right.
motivation.
Well, and I think the way you touched on it there with, hearing voices in a sense, right? It's got to be the right voices,
Yeah, right.
and our faith helps us with that, right? Hopefully.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned that, and I want to get into your story, which is titled "Whose Story Are You Living?" which is pretty important right there, just in and of itself.
Yeah.
Just the title. But to get into what you just said, you talked about your first year in college,
Mhm.
and you felt kind of lost. You felt unhappy. You didn't know which way to go. And I don't know if you were a believer at that point in time, but maybe just explain those different things that were going on to us that, could possibly help anybody watching today.
Sure. And to answer that question, I was a believer. I've been a believer all my life. I wouldn't say I was much of a practicing one at the time, and that's a whole different story on how that came about. But yeah, Yeah, I went into college as a civil engineering major. I had never gotten anything less than an A all through my education, K through 12. So I graduated valedictorian. I went into college with scholarships that paid for my tuition and a little bit of books. And I went into a university that had a wonderful engineering degree, an engineering program, and I had, in a lot of ways, kind of stacked the deck in terms of, I'm going to go to this school that has this program. I'm good in math and science. I'm listening to my counselors that are telling me, you're good in math and science, and K-State has a great engineering, Kansas State has a great engineering program. You should go into engineering. You should really think about that. You like to build things out of Legos. We can kind of see the pieces coming together here, pun intended. And all of that, I remember taking aptitude or career tests in high school, and I figured I knew I was going to go to K-State to be a civil engineering major. So I would stack the deck on those to make sure that, you know how to game the system when it comes to those career aptitude tests, and how to make sure that the career that it spits out for you is the career that you've kind of got already figured out. I did a lot of that. And when I got to Kansas State and got into the program and started taking classes, I was lost, man. It was not at all me. But I didn't realize it at the time. You're going through it and you just kind of figure that this is just hard for me. I guess I'm not as smart as I used, or as I thought I was. Why do these classes seem to make sense to all these other kids? Aren't they taking this at the same time that I am? Aren't they freshmen too? Like, why are they already understanding all this stuff about surveying and chemistry of concrete mixtures? Like,
Right.
I don't get this stuff. How do they get it? And it was a lot of self-doubt. It was a lot of, I guess I just have to grit my teeth and pull myself up by my bootstraps, and all those cliches, and just do it. And never stopping to ask myself the question until much later, when I got put on academic probation, is this actually what I want? And finally, after way too long of a period of time, I realized, no, it's not. It's not me. I had spent a lot of time listening and being guided by other people's plans for my life. Not ill-intentioned plans, by the way. And I want to make that clear. It's not like people were telling me to go into engineering because they wanted me to fail. That's not it at all. It just happened to be that I never took their course or their intended direction for my life and weighed it against what I felt I was actually best at, passionate about, all those things that we've kind of been talking about it to this point.
Yeah. No, and you mentioned concrete, which is kind of interesting in and of itself, right? The Romans made concrete. They made it in many different ways that, it could cure underwater. I mean, there's still, pillars out there, or docks that were, back 2,000 years ago or something,
Yeah.
right? And then people forgot how to make it, and we're just now learning how to remake it again to the quality that the Romans did. It's just funny, but that's just one of those things that is complicated, because I think we've all been there, maybe, hopefully, so we can relate to, like what you mentioned. You go to college, and now it's a whole new different world. That, man, this stuff's tough. Like, what did I just sign up for, right? And that can be discouraging, and we can get that sense of lost, or searching, or just trying to fit in, right? And I think that's one of those things, like, it's almost like peer pressure, right? And we got to really come to the realization of who we are, I think, and we got to be comfortable within and of ourselves. And you talk about that in the book too. You talk about, self-awareness and reflection. So
Yeah.
give us an idea of of how that works so that we can maybe better hone in our own selves?
I want to be clear before I go into that. Hard work is good.
Of course.
Getting through challenges and fighting through something even when it's hard is good. So it's not like you have to question everything that is hard and deviate from it. But you do have to, and to answer your question, I'm fascinated by self-reflection. I am fascinated at moments in people's lives where they finally go inward and seek answers to who they are and what they actually want. And it goes back to questions, asking yourself really tough, uncomfortable questions in a moment, in a time, in a place, in a space that allows you to be really honest with yourself, allows you to say, how did I come to this? Was I listening to myself the entire time, or was I allowing the opinions and thoughts of others to guide me? And that's okay if that's true and what you actually want. But it gets difficult when you're perhaps thinking about going against the wishes of a parent. It's difficult when perhaps you're an immigrant and your family is depending on you for a certain career as a way to financially lift your family up out of a situation or a class. There are nuances and complexities in different situations that this are affected by this. But moments of self-reflection come when you finally ask yourself those tough questions and you begin to say, how did I come to this agreement with myself? Who influenced this? Is that still relevant in my life? What happens if I were to deviate? Am I okay with challenging the people in my life who may disagree with me? All of these things are valid questions, and some of them might be really tough and uncomfortable, especially in different family dynamics, as I kind of outlined. But in that moment, if you can do that and you can honestly answer those questions of yourself, you begin to outline perhaps a different path for your life. And I'm fascinated by that. That's what happened with me. Now, when you do that, you have to overcome, as I write about in the chapter in the book, you have to overcome some sunk cost. And it's not sunk cost as it was for me in terms of money for college classes and my books and all that stuff. Yeah, that's there. If I changed majors or if I did something different, I would basically lose the money that I spent on those engineering classes. But it's the sunk cost of who we are, who we have said that we are, and who we have portrayed or voiced out to the world what we're going to be and what we stand for. It comes down to our dignity, Donato.
Mhm.
It comes down to us thinking about, if I say I'm this thing for this long, and then I show up in a different time, place, and space and say, I'm no longer that thing. How are we going to look to those that we care about, we love, that we have relationship with, to go back to those 4 Ps that I outlined? How are we going to look to them? And can we carry our dignity? Can we carry our head high in dignity through that transition? Look, the crazy little dirty secret about people is we often have snapshot images in time of a person. Just think about your class reunion or your high school graduating class. If you were to go back in time when you graduated with your high school classmates, your belief about who those people are, what they stand for, how nice they are, how rude they are, like all these things, you've got a snapshot Polaroid moment in time of who those people are. And 20 years later at your reunion, when you show up and those people are different and no longer present themselves in the same way, for better or for worse, it's really tough to overcome that snapshot moment in time that you've got from 20 years ago. And that when you start to feed into your dignity, your sense of self-worth, your sense of who I am as a person and who I say or what I stand for, who I voiced that I am out to people, those questions and that you've got to get real comfortable with being uncomfortable for a moment of time while you present that new version of yourself out to the world.
Yeah. I mean, all of that was awesome, and you actually answered the question I was going to ask you. About your sunk costs, because that all is so important, right? Like, we put on, sometimes, I don't know if it's unwittingly or unknowingly, but we put on a facade sometimes, right?
Absolutely.
We even try to puff ourselves up and say, hey, look at me, I'm this
Yeah.
and that, instead of just being real. The whole self-awareness and reflecting, I think, is something that we all have to do, and I've always tried to do that. I've gone even a step further, and I'll ask friends or maybe some other people that I trust, like, who am I, right? Or do I do this, or do I do that, or what do you think I do, or because they know who you are, right? And hopefully they're not going to bash you per se. That's going to come off in a good manner. But I think that even helps us to, like, we think we know who we are, but we're seen differently by others, right? Kind of like you're saying, that
Yeah.
dignity that we give.
Maybe not. I don't know that I would use the word seen. I would use experienced differently. We're experienced
There you
differently
go.
by others. Now, only we know truly who we are because we are, if nothing but the soul and the mind that exists within our flesh and bones.
Right.
And there's a guest that I had on my podcast. His name's Dr. Kurt Gray. He works at the University of North Carolina in the Deepest Beliefs Lab. He runs that organization. He introduced me to this concept or this idea that he calls the problem of other minds. And the problem of other minds is you can never know what someone else is truly, fully thinking. The only way to come even remotely close is to do what you just said, Donato, is to ask questions. It's why my podcast used to be called The Follow-Up Question. I want people to ask questions of not only themselves, but of others, especially in conflict. But you're right, in those moments where we are doing that self-reflection, it never hurts to as long as you can trust the other person
Right. Right.
to say, how do you experience me? Now, whether you choose to adopt that or set that belief or that view on the shelf and say, hey, I don't agree with that because that's not what I hear and feel up here in my head. That's up to you. And you need to be aware and cognizant of that. But I love that concept or that reminder that the problem of other minds is that you just cannot access them. You have no way except through curiosity. That is true of yourself and that is true of others.
Well, and then that's where we get down to, like what your podcast is called, rethinking communication, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to communicate. I mean, things have gone, social media, right? And stuff that, I don't know. The way I grew up, you go out and played, right? I mean, you actually had fun with your friends, and you talked with them, and you did things with them, and we don't do that so much anymore. And it's, oh, did I get enough likes? Ooh, or all this kind of stuff, and it we need to get back to honestly communicating with one another. And I mean, I think that was kind of clear in your book. It's definitely clear in your podcast, right? But, like, all right, so you experienced all this stuff going through college. And then in your junior year, you make a transition. So you went through, I don't know if you want to call it a trial, right? A triumphant moment, perhaps,
Yeah.
of your first 2 years in college. Now, how did you deal with that? Because you also talked about your parents or parents in general. How did you deal with your parents or other people that saw you a certain way And now all of a sudden in your junior year, you're switching gears.
Yeah, real quick correction on the timeline. It was actually I switched after the second semester of my sophomore year.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
But totally and actually switched to open option, and then my junior year I declared major as a journalism major.
Gotcha.
But that gets us off track. One of the things that happens when you do that self-reflection, and one of the questions I encourage people to ask is, how will others be affected by this decision? Once I knew that civil engineering was not the path for me, I still had the process to go through in terms of like, how do I actually make this decision? What are the real tactical decisions? How do I go and change my major? How do I tell others, including my parents, that the first 3 semesters of my college career were a waste? Not a waste, but you get what I'm saying. I'm being a little hyperbolic here. And so you ask that question of how are others affected? And again, there's nuance to this, because as I outlined earlier, you may be the first to go to college and your family has scrapped and scraped to get the money to go to college, so that perhaps you didn't graduate with any debt. And now you're a year and a half behind if you change majors. There is nuance and complexity to this. And I'm not saying that other people's opinions and experiences and thoughts and ideas don't matter, but you do have to weigh that against what do I see myself doing for the rest of my life in this instance. And one of the things that we have a tendency to do is build things up into more serious, dire than they actually are. My conversation with my parents, paraphrased, went like this: "Hey, I hate civil engineering and I think I want to do something different." "Really? That's a little surprising, but go for it." And so it was I'll say easy, and I put that in air quotes, but it was not nearly the conversation that I had built up in my head. Finding my new major, which I eventually landed in journalism, was another process of asking myself questions. What do I like to do? Where do I best fit in? What classes have I taken so far that have sparked an interest? It was writing, it was communication, it was I loved sports. So gosh, what if I could actually get paid to cover the games that I love to go watch and see? I think this might work out for me. And it did. Now I'm no longer a practicing journalist, but I did just graduate with my degree in my master's in mass communications. I've carried that through. I'm now in marketing. I'm a speaking and leadership communications coach. Like, those threads have stuck with me ever since making that change, because I finally got real again with myself and asking those questions. Okay, for the first time in your life, what do you want to do? Not what your aptitude tests say that you kind of gamed, not that your counselor said, not that the school is known for. Michael, man, what do you want to do? And it came back over and over again to writing, creativity, communication. Now it's kind of morphed into I love helping work through conflict and what communication looks like there. You've mentioned it a couple times. Part of the issue that I see in our world today is your father, when those people could disagree with him, as you mentioned earlier in the show. My guess is those disagreements were happening face to face.
Oh, yeah.
My guess is many people, when they have disagreements now, they're happening in an online space where you don't get to see the other person. You don't get to see how your words, the name calling, the personal attacks affect them. Look, when we are attacked like that, when we are disagreed with in that way, we show it physically. And that's how another human being relates to another human being. That word you just said, I can read that on your face, how that landed with you. That's an issue and a struggle that I don't have a great answer for right now. I can't tell us, hey, get off social media. Nobody's going to do that. Nobody's going to do that. It's doing great. But when you think about the time and place and space to have a disagreement, you can again ask yourself, what's my goal here? And am I in the right environment to accomplish that goal? Now, most of the time, your goal, many people's goal when in disagreement, is to change somebody's mind. Well, should that be your goal? Is that really how people's minds are changed? When one person says to the other, I'm going to change your mind. And so here's my argument. Never happens, never will. And in that space, is this is a Twitter thread the space to do it? Is an Instagram comment section the space to do it where that nuanced conversation can happen? Absolutely not. And I think we all know that. Now, our actions tell us we're often driven by selfish motivations. We've got to get honest and real about ourselves. Am I helping or contributing to my goal or not?
Yeah. And so we talk about that self-reflection and all those different things. I had one early on. I was about 18, 19. And unlike yourself being born into it in a sense, I didn't grow up in the faith, right?
Yeah.
I found Christ on my own as a youth. And so I'd only been doing the Christian thing for a year or two, right? And I'm going to work one morning, and I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye, and I look up at the sky and stuff, and it was a gray overcast day, but there was this perfect slit in the sky, like God was peeking down at me or something. And I was like, oh man, is this the rapture or something, you know? And I'm like, oh no, I'm not ready. What am I gonna do, you know? Because I wanted to do things in life, right? And I didn't fully understand our walk with Christ yet, and different things. And now that I'm more mature, I can look at things a little bit differently. But that's always one of those points of reflection that I have, that I look back at and say, okay, am I ready now? Is there something that I want to do still that's preventing me from going home to heaven, right? Or am I ready, right? As my path, you know, is it okay if I go home, you know, and those kinds of things. So I think it's so important that we all take a good hard look at ourselves, have that point of reflection, that we can just be honest, right? We can be open. Maybe we can gather a couple of friends and say, you know, am I on the right path, right? Like you did. And ask yourself those pointed questions. I think that's just so important, as you've stated. And maybe I want to get a little bit still into that sunk cost fallacy that you were talking about, because I think there's so much there to unpack, and I think that will help us, because it's not just monetary necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah. Sunk cost is, it's in a lot of our, what's the word? In a lot of the angst that we feel within ourselves, sunk cost is often the unnamed thing that is driving a lot of our behavior. Now, we can look at it in a relationship with a significant other. And how many times have we heard, I'm sticking through this relationship because I've been with them so long.
Right.
Well, that's sunk cost. You're saying, I have sunk so much into this that if I were to remove myself from it, I would feel like all of that was a waste. And not just a waste, but that I would look like a fool for doing it, both for staying so long and for throwing it all away. Right? That's the sunk cost. And so that's the dignity part that I'm talking about. We're thinking ahead to the judgment that we will feel from others, and of course ourselves as well, of, well, if you weren't happy, why'd you stay there so long? If you didn't like that person, why get into the relationship in the first place? Explaining human behavior can be really, really hard, and I am not an expert in how to do that. But I do know that that was what I was feeling in that moment of, hey, I don't like civil engineering, but I'm a year and a half into this. What am I going to do? how do I make up the ground here? How do I go back to my hometown and tell all my friends and family, yeah, I could not hack. I wasn't smart enough to be an engineer. Look, I mentioned earlier I was getting straight A's in I got straight A's all through my K through 12 education. I was valedictorian, got all those scholarships. I I got put on academic probation with a 1.9 GPA, and I was told if I don't get my GPA above a 2 after the next semester, I was gone. So you want to talk about sunk cost fallacy for me and caring about what other people are going to think and say and how
Yeah.
I can keep my dignity. Changing my major because I got put on academic probation is admitting defeat. It's admitting I'm not smart enough. At least that's the story that I'm telling myself. When we think about sunk cost fallacy is often used, or I believe the term often originated at work, where I work as the director of marketing at a software company right now. Let's say you're developing a new product and you've spent 2 years developing this product and dropped $2 million of development time into creating it, and it's still not ready. You've got it in the hands of a few customers, and they're saying, "This thing does not work at all. This is not what we wanted. This is not what we need." And you're like, "Do we keep going? Or do we cut our losses and redirect?" And the thing about sunk cost fallacy is kind of the outcome of it is you often, when you deviate from that path, when you finally stop investing into this thing that you know is failing,
Right.
you find a different direction that actually could work instead of just digging the hole deeper because, gosh, I've been digging for a really long time. Better keep going. It's the same idea with that. And at no company wants to admit, hey, we invested 2 years and $2 million into something that was a mistake. People's jobs could be on the line if that were the case, or in some instances. This is a deeply motivating thing for us, often in the negative, and it's often unnamed and unsaid, but it's a real thing. It is when we're talking about motivation. Negative motivation can be as powerful, if not much more so, than positive motivation, and sunk cost is often one of those negative drivers.
Yeah. And there's the other side to that. The old fishing term. You gotta cut bait. you know,
Yep.
yeah. Sometimes you just gotta
Yep.
cut those losses and do those things that you wouldn't normally do. You talk about relationships. Some people are in bad relationships that they shouldn't be in, and they're such a good person outside of that relationship.
Yeah.
And they'll be much more happier. Or your example with just the college thing. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that started off in one thing and have switched to another. You know,
Happens all the time.
and yeah, it happens all the time because either we perceive something or we think it'll work out. We're gonna be a rock and roll star. you know, but we gotta not that those things aren't people's passions, because obviously you had a heart for that, but we do got to find out what's that thing we just love to do, right? And then pursue
Yeah.
that like you ultimately did. And I think that's the key to us being happy, right? At the same time, the
Yeah.
onus is on us, right? We do have to do some things. We have to keep ourselves motivated. We gotta surround ourselves with positive things. You know. So as we are kind of winding down here, I want you to tell anybody else that's out here anything else that we've missed, but how to get a hold of you, what kind of things that you can help them with, and just leave us with some parting words of encouragement and motivation.
Yeah. Thank you. I would close what I have to say about this topic like this. Two things can be true at the same time. you can be deeply motivated and enthusiastic to start a new path while also sad and mournful of the path that you were on, that you invested a lot of time, energy, and effort, and perhaps even love into. We can hold the human emotions are grand enough and deep enough to hold space for both things to be true at the same time, or multiple things to be true at the same time. Just like in disagreement and in conflict, you can love someone, you can respect someone, you can desire better for someone in disagreement and be disappointed, be distraught, be upset even in their actions or their words or their beliefs. Two things can be true at the same time. So much of our world has been reduced to the binary, either or, yes or no, black or white. You either are or you aren't. And that is not the case. We all know within our minds the deep intensity of the range of emotions that we can experience. I would encourage people to go look up the emotions wheel. Just Google emotions wheel, and you will find there are, I believe, 9 core emotions that humans experience. But I want to say there's like 250 deeper, richer, fuller emotions that we all have. And being able to give voice to those things and say, I am this and this and this all at the same time is completely human and completely acceptable. So when it comes to sunk cost fallacy and the things I write about in my book, I can mourn the time and energy and money and effort spent trying to pursue this path that I thought was the right path for me. And I can say, I'm setting that aside because this other thing is true, perhaps more true, that this is the path that I want for my life. This is the direction that I want to go. And yes, it might be equally hard, but it's the type of hard that I'm willing to invest in because I can see a path forward for my life in a way that I used to not be able to on the other. And that goes back to hard things are worth doing. Yep. It's why I love to wrap us back around to the beginning of our conversation. It's why I loved Abraham Lincoln, the book on Abraham Lincoln, Team of Rivals. Hard things are worth doing if there is a grander goal and purpose behind them. That's what motivates you. That's where motivation comes from. Now, as far as me, you can go to my website, michaelashford.com. That's where all my stuff is. That's where you can find my book. I wrote the chapter in Triumphant. I have a book called Can I Ask a Question? And it's all about shifting the paradigm of change and communication and conflict. And then I'm a speaking and leadership communications coach. So I do speaking coaching. I'm the head speaker coach for a TEDx event here in Colorado, TEDx Manitou Springs. I do leadership communication workshops. So if you're at all interested in any of that, I'm here for you.
Excellent. Well, hey, Michael, thanks for being on the show here. It was great. I hope and pray and believe that these are just going to touch a lot of people out there, right? They're going to take a hold of something that was said that is the change that they've been looking for in their lives. And I think that's kind of what we're all here to do, right? Is Absolutely. To help inspire everybody else that's out there that we can reach. And, again, I encourage everyone to go to Michael's podcast as well and check it out. It's awesome. And that's the thing. You make people think differently, right? And I think we need those different perspectives in our lives. We got to get a right mindset as opposed to some of the junk that we've been told throughout our lives. But
I hope so.
Most importantly, I want everybody to get up off the couch, get motivated, and get out there and do something. And until next time, be blessed.
Follow Dr. Donato on Facebook and LinkedIn at Donato Parisi, or go to donatomotivates.com. Remember, you can be anything you want or desire. All you have to do is get motivated.